Today on The Journey with Steve DeWitt.
You thinking about the return of Christ? When all of this whole thing wraps up and we spend eternity with Him? That's what James is calling us for. And that's what we need in the midst of our trials, in the midst of our suffering, to know that He is with us, to know that He loves us, and to realize that this is a light and a momentary trial and Christ is coming back.
Welcome to The Journey with Pastor Steve DeWitt, Senior Pastor and Bible Teacher at Bethel Church in Northwest Indiana. I'm your host, Tim Svoboda. When trials hit, our problems can fill the horizon. So today, Pastor Steve turns to the book of James and points us to three unlikely teachers of patience: a farmer, the prophets, and Job. They remind us that Christ is coming back, and that changes everything. It's a message titled, Jesus is Coming, So Don't Give Up. You can listen online at thejourney.fm. Now, here's Pastor Steve.
Christ's return for us, friends, is this. It is the blessed hope. It is the thing that we are to look forward to. And I say that because I am not convinced that many of us think this way. And I know that I don't, as I ought, frankly. We get living our life, we get thinking about our days, and we're not thinking about the fact that this whole thing is going to end, and Christ is going to usher in eternity. And that might happen in my life. It certainly will happen, I'll step into it, that eternity when I die, but that we are all on the verge of that, and that is intended by God to be a source of great hope to us. And I wonder if it is. You know, if I could just say, way back in the 70s, when I was like 10, all right, I remember going to a Jack Van Impe crusade. And at this Jack Van Impe crusade, he got up and he was talking about the return of Christ. And he said, I remember this because I was terrified. I remember he said this, he goes, well, the astronomers are telling us that in 1980, 2 years from now, all the planets of the solar system are going to be in line. This only happens once every gazillion years, whatever it is. And we believe firmly that this is the date that Christ is going to return. That's kind of how he said it, like that. I remember being terrified by that. Christ is returning. I'm not going to graduate from 6th grade, you know. And it was a terrifying thing to me. And if you remember at that time, there was a lot of talk about the return of Christ. And there were books that were being written. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that there was the Cold War and nuclear holocaust. And there was this real sense of, maybe the Antichrist is going to appear and all this is going on. Books were selling like crazy on that subject. When was the last time a book on the return of Jesus Christ was a bestseller in the United States? It has been a long time. And I believe it's because we are so comfortable here. We can no longer sing, "The world's not my home, I'm just passing through." This world has become our home. And too many of us, I believe, love this world. And so the thought of Christ returning is, like me in 5th grade, a terrifying thing. Well, I don't want that to happen. There's too much I want to enjoy in this world before I get to that thing. I'll get to that eventually. And James says, oh, my dear friend, the Lord's coming is near. We need to think about that and allow it to give us the endurance that we need in the midst of the trials that do eventually come in our life. Now, one of the things I love about James is that he's probably the best illustrator in the whole Bible. When he makes a point, he comes up with an illustration. He'd be a fun guy to listen to. And here now he gives 3 examples of this hopeful expectation of the return of Christ. And here's the first one in verse 7. We are to persevere like a farmer. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Like a farmer. When I say I'm from Iowa, I will often hear, oh, did you grow up on a farm? That's what they automatically will say, and the answer is no. But my dad did work 40 years for John Deere, so I feel somewhat qualified to speak on the subject. So farmers, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I do believe that planting requires a certain amount of faith and patience, doesn't it? I mean, in the spring, there they are out in the field. You see the tractors going back and forth, and they're planting the seed, and there's a large investment that goes into planting the seed. And those farmers, if they really thought about it, they are exerting a tremendous amount of faith to believe that that seed is going to be watered by rain, and that there's going to be nutrients in the ground, and that the sun is going to give it what it needs, sun-wise. And that this plant is going to grow. Huge investment on the front end, and then a lot of waiting. You have to be very patient if you're a farmer. You got to wait all the way until the fall, and to believe that all of the things that the crop needs are going to come. What James calls the valuable crop. It takes patience to do that. And I know if I was a farmer, I would probably be impatient. I would not be a very good farmer. I would plant the seed, and like the next day I'd be out there looking at it. Don't you know? Come on, I'd be doing that number. And I would be hawking the Weather Channel. If I was a farmer, it'd be on constantly on the TV. Some of you are that way anyway, probably. I'd want to know, is it going to get the rain? I got this huge investment out in the field. I need this thing to grow. 4th of July, I'd be out there with my knee, doing this number. Knee high by 4th of July. I would. You have to be patient to be a farmer, and you have to wait for the reward. One of the farmers in our church basically apologized to me one time. He said, you know what, I can only give to the church once a year. And I thought, you know what, that's the farmer's life. They get paid once a year. Everything is invested and then waited for. He waits patiently. And I think the lesson here is clear, isn't it? The lesson is that Christ is the valuable crop. Here we are in our life and we're waiting. Christian, you've made a faith investment. You've planted seeds of faith. You're believing that this faith is going to grow and that Christ is going to return and that there's going to be a payback for the investment on the other end. But here we are now having to wait patiently, aren't we? So persevere like a farmer. The next example he uses are the prophets. He says, brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. Now, by prophets here, I believe he's talking about the prophets of the Old Testament. And the prophets of the Old Testament were the predominantly men that God used to speak to his people. Most of the Old Testament is prophets and the words of prophets. And these guys suffered a lot. For example, let's talk about Jeremiah. Jeremiah was known as the weeping prophet, and there's a reason for that. His life was miserable. His life included being placed in stocks. He was thrown into prison on numerous occasions. He was hunted by men in his own hometown. These are like the buddies he grew up with, because they didn't like the message that he was giving, in spite of the fact that he was just saying what God told him to say. He was beaten. He was scourged. He nearly died when they threw him into a cistern, which was a big place that they stored water. It was all mud. He was down somewhere up to his waist in mud and was in there for a long time and was about to die before they pulled him out. So he suffered. Jeremiah suffered. Other prophets suffered. Take Daniel, for example. Daniel, as a teenager, was deported out of his hometown and spent his entire life living in a foreign land. How about Ezekiel, whose wife died very suddenly? How about Hosea, who had a nightmare marriage to a prostitute? I'll bet that was a nightmare. And of course, you know Jonah's struggles. In fact, what hero of the faith in the Old Testament got through his or her life without suffering? And the answer is that none of them did. All of them faced terrible and difficult trials. Now, we oftentimes fail to realize that. We think about these guys and we're like, we teach our kids song, dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, like this. And wouldn't it be great to have been Daniel there in the lion's den, staring down those lions? Well, I wish I could have been him. Or we think, David, to be David and to slay the giant, to stand against Saul. Look at David's life. Would you really want to live David's life, really? Honestly? Abraham, Moses, go through all of them. We look at them, we think, oh, how great they were and how wonderful it was. We name our kids after them. We got pictures of them painted in the children's center. They're all wonderful. And yet, they suffered. And you know what trials felt like 3,000 and 4,000 years ago? They felt like trials. These people didn't know they were Bible characters. They didn't know they were heroes of the faith. They were just living their life the same way that we're living our life. And they persevered through it. That's why we admire them. That's why we look at them. James almost says, it's a little bit of biblical humor if you want to look at it that way. He says, we look at them and we consider them blessed. If you were to interview them in the midst of their trial, they didn't feel very blessed. And today you might be here and you don't feel blessed in your trial either. You think to yourself, if God loved me, he wouldn't have this going on in my life. If I really was a man of faith, I wouldn't have this happen to me. And on we could go. The same way these guys felt. And yet we look back at them now and say, what a blessing it was, what they went through. And someday, Christian, as hard as it is to believe this, we will look back on the trials of our life the same way. We will say how blessed we were to go through that. Look what God did in my life in the midst of that trial. Am I not thankful for the way that God formed Christ in me in that trial? That's the way that we'll look at it now. It doesn't feel that way now, does it? We feel the pain of it. We feel the suffering of it. But someday we will see it from a different perspective. The story is told of Chuck Swindoll. Pastor Chuck Swindoll, well-known Bible teacher, radio teacher in our day, probably one of the big name guys, right? Well, the story's told Chuck Swindoll that he went to this seminary to do a week of chapel speaking. And I remember when I was in seminary, anytime a big name guy came in, we all were like, and we'd want to be near him, and we'd follow around and, just wanting some word to drip off of his lips that would encourage us, And so this was going on. There were hero worshipers like me at the seminary, apparently, because they all clumped around him, and everywhere he went, there was all these guys following him, and, you just see the entourage going around the seminary with Chuck Swindoll right there at the center. And one of the guys in that group gushed to Chuck Swindoll and said, Chuck Swindoll, I want to be just like you. And Chuck Swindoll stopped, and he looked at the guy, and he goes, if you knew what the Lord had to take me through to get me to where I am today, I don't think so. But wait, he's Chuck Swindoll. His life is perfect. Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before for Chuck Swindoll. He's walking in the garden alone. He walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I'm his own. It's got to be a blissful experience if you're Chuck Swindoll living the Christian life. He can't have problems. He's Chuck Swindoll. And yet, we look at the great heroes of the faith in the Bible. They had sorrows and troubles. We look at our modern day heroes of the faith. They have sorrows and troubles. Why can't we get the idea that this is the way that it is when you're following after, when you're on the Calvary Road and you're taking up your cross and you're following Christ? Guess what? There is trouble that we have to persevere in. It doesn't mean God hates us. Doesn't mean he's not for us. Doesn't mean he doesn't love us. He is doing this because he does love us. And if you're discouraged here today, perhaps God will use this word to get your eyes on the big picture. That's what happens to me in my trials. I become consumed with the trial. You've seen me do this before, right? Here's the trial. It's this little piece of a grain of wood right here. And when I'm in a trial, this is the way that I am, like this. And guess what? From this perspective, my trial looks really big, really, really big. And you know what I need to do? I need to pull back from it. I need to see the big picture. It's not so big. That little grain right there, it's not so big in light of the big picture. And in the big picture, what is God doing in my life? What is my future with Christ's return? What does it mean to be with the risen Lord for eternity? And to allow that to encourage us. And I wonder if you're there today. Is that cross you're carrying more than you think that you can bear? Maybe this word will encourage you. Here's the third illustration, and we're not going to spend much time on this one, but it's Job. If you ever want to feel bad about how you're handling trials in your life, just think about Job. If you think you got it bad, think about Job. Let me read the text, verse 11. You've heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. And I don't have time to tell the whole story, but basically in 15 minutes, Job went from being a wealthy, relatively happy guy to losing his wealth. He lost everything. He lost his family, or his children, that is. He lost his health and had to live for a period of time with all of this loss in his life. And God was bringing this tremendous trial into him. Now, he still had a few friends, and he still had his wife. And why God kept his wife around, I don't know, but maybe it was part of the trial, don't you think? I'm only commenting. I'm not making any judgment on that whatsoever. But in spite of all that happened, here are some faith statements from Job. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Though he slay me, talking about God, yet I will hope in him. My ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. That's a pretty impressive list of responses to a trial. What's not so impressive about Job is the fact that he complained a lot. This may not be impressive, but it's wonderfully encouraging. You read through Job, Job complained a lot. He said things like this to God. He goes, God, what did I do to deserve this? What did I do to deserve all of this that you've brought into my life? He complained against God. He said, God, why are you doing this? You know what Job said? Job said a lot of the same things that you and I say in the midst of our trials. And yet, the Holy Spirit presents Job in James 5 as an example of how to respond in a trial. And I find that wonderfully encouraging, that I don't have to face the trial and to not feel a sense of discouragement and to think, well, I'm not pleasing God because I'm discouraged in this trial. Or when I feel like I've gotten the raw end of the deal somehow and that I deserve more or better, that doesn't mean that I'm, God's abandoned me. Job did all those same things, and yet he was an example. He was an example. And what did God do at the end of the story? At the end of Job, God restores all the things back to Job, and he actually has more than he lost prior. And that's what James is talking about when he says, you've seen what the Lord's brought about. So these guys weren't superheroes. They were just normal people struggling to live by faith in the difficulties of life. And we don't know what God's purposes are in it. Job certainly didn't know. And yet, the Lord had a purpose in it. And in the end, he rewarded Job for his perseverance. Here's the last thing. The last thing is that it takes faith to believe. You have to have good theology in a trial. You have to have good theology. Because the trial begs us to think that God isn't good, he doesn't care, that there's, to question him in that way. And yet, look at the last statement in our passage today. It says this, the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. The Greek word there for compassion is another one of these interesting ones. It's a little gross, so the young people would probably enjoy this a little bit. It means this, that God is many-boweled. Many-boweled. And it comes from the first century that they believed that compassion came from your bowels. When you felt empathy for somebody or were you hurt for somebody, you felt it down in your bowels. And we say the same kind of thing, really. We say, oh, I hurt so deeply for you. What do we mean by that? Well, when somebody else is hurting, our hurt for them, it begins in our throat. We get a lump in our throat for them, and then it moves into this kind of feeling down in here where we feel like heavy. Are you with me? And then if we really feel for them, we'll get almost like a gut ache all the way down here somewhere. And they felt the same things in the first century, and they said compassion comes from the bowels. God is many-boweled. What does that mean? God has an extraordinary capacity for compassion for his people, an extraordinary capacity for mercy for his people. And that is where I think ultimately our hope has to lie. It's in God. When you're talking with somebody that's hurting, what can you say to somebody that has experienced a deep and painful hurt? Do not go to some silly platitude. Go to God. Point them to a God who loves them, who is filled with mercy, who is many-boweled and has a tremendous capacity for compassion for his people. And in his love and in his compassion and in his mercy, he extends to us the grace that we need, which allows us to endure in trials that seem so overwhelming, and to do it constantly with a view that this trial is temporary. Christian, there is no permanent trial for a Christian. For an unbeliever, there is no permanent pleasure. It's completely the opposite. For us, all of these things, they're temporary. Paul calls them our light and momentary trials. They are temporary. Christ is returning, and then all of that goes away. And we step into eternity, and it's going to be great. One of the organizations that we have supported as a church for many years is the Shepherd's Home. The Shepherd's Home is a ministry. It's in Union Grove, Wisconsin. It's a ministry to people that have mental disabilities, and they have a real compassion. It's a residence. They live there. They take care of their needs, and it's a wonderful thing that they do. Well, as I understand it, at the Shepherd's Home, they have trouble keeping their windows clean. And the reason they do is that there's all these time nose prints on the windows at the Shepherd's Home. And as I understand it, it's because that they teach these residents about the gospel, and they teach them about Jesus coming back, that Jesus is coming back. So they clean the windows. But every day, those residents go to the windows, and they press their noses against the windows of their facility, and they want to see if today maybe is the day that Jesus comes back. Kind of makes you wonder who really has the disability, doesn't it? Any nose prints on the windows of your house? You thinking about the return of Christ when all of this whole thing wraps up and we spend eternity with him? That's what James is calling us for. And that's what we need in the midst of our trials, in the midst of our suffering, to know that he is with us, to know that he loves us, and to realize that this is a light and a momentary trial, and Christ is coming back. And when he does, God will work everything together for the good, for those who have been called according to his purpose. And what a day that will be, as the song says, when his face we shall see. I look forward to that day.
You're listening to The Journey with Pastor Steve DeWitt, and a message titled, Jesus is Coming, So Don't Give Up. To hear it again, or any message from our study in James, visit thejourney.fm. Every day on The Journey, our goal is to take listeners into the depths of Scripture and make its truths easy to understand and live out. But many folks don't realize that The Journey is a listener-supported ministry, and gifts from friends like you are what keep this teaching going out each day to people across the country. If this program has encouraged you or helped you grow, we invite you to give today and help carry its impact even further to others who need this same hope. Any gift of any amount truly makes a difference and lets us know this ministry is making an impact. Call 844-7-JOURNEY or give online at thejourney.fm. And as our thanks, we'll send you Humility by Andrew Murray. 12 brief meditations on the quiet, Christ-like grace Murray calls the very beauty of Jesus. It's a small book with a surprisingly deep reach, and many have found it both humbling and freeing, an invitation to a blessed home of rest in the Lord, where the heart is at peace, even when everything around us is trouble. It's a classic this generation may have never read, yet one that has quietly shaped believers for over a century. This is the last week we'll be mentioning this timeless book, so request your copy when you give today. Call 844-7-JOURNEY. That's 844-756-8763. Or visit thejourney.fm. Well, I'm Tim Svoboda. Join us tomorrow as Pastor Steve opens James chapter 5 and the third commandment, and shows why God's name carries infinite weight. That's Thursday on The Journey with Steve DeWitt. The Bible teaching of Steve DeWitt is brought to you by The Journey.